Hi again, guys, and welcome to another installment of Beards and Cars, the podcast series here on the channel. And this episode is a very special one because it's the first collab episode with a member of the community who any of you who've checked out the Discord server will, of course, be familiar with, Maverick.
Hello. That's all I've got.
And as the nature of a collab episode goes, it's going to be very informal. Of course, when you're recording something on your own, you can basically have your own pace. There are no pauses. Follow whatever train of thought you do or don't have in my case. But when it's two people, of course, there are going to be pauses. I'll try and edit some of that down, but hopefully it will be something that you guys enjoy. And I definitely hope to have more collabs, hope to have more people featured on the channel. We've got other patrons, basically, who are going to be on here as well. Maybe in the future, other channels, maybe other car guys, stuff like that. But obviously, that's really long-term stuff. And basically, what we're here to talk about is something which we've both been very passionate about for quite some time, which is, in a general sense, Polyphony's marketing of the game. The way they do or don't have dialogue with the community, the way they do their trailers, the way they put out content for the game. And Mav definitely has thoughts. I have my thoughts. We're not as heated now necessarily as we were in the moment, but that can be a better place.
You can definitely say that again.
Yeah, it's a better place to come from. Not always, but generally it is, because you have a cooler head and you can formulate your thoughts more. So I don't know if you want to.
I think it is worth saying at the moment, and I really don't want to be that typical guy, but I think it is worth saying we do not dislike Polyphony as a company, and we do cherish the games and the memories that we've had with those games, and we still think Gran Turismo is fantastic. It's just the way that they have recently shown themselves on how they put forward their product, it just annoys us, and that's what we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely, and the lack thereof sometimes as well, not just the whole community spotlight thing, which we've talked about a number of times on the Discord server and on the channel, with how they constantly cater to the 1%, whereas in this community we cater to the other 99. That's kind of the slogan. But even stuff that you mentioned, Mav, like the trailers, like we don't really get proper trailers, and we get teasers that aren't even from the page. They're from Kaz's page, which, you know, it's still Kaz, but it's not the official page. It's a very haphazard system of releasing information to the community.
I mean, you got to remember as well, and if you do hear that noise in the background, someone's getting a house extension. Fantastic stuff. Now, it's if you remember, what was it, 2 or 3 updates ago? I'm pretty sure that we had a trailer that was dropped after the update was dropped, where there was silhouettes dropped on the same day as the update, but everyone knew what car we were getting because of the FIA event. I think that was 2 or 3 updates ago anyway. And that was the rock bottom point. And that's probably actually what ended up sparking our discussion in the first place.
Because it was around June time, yeah.
Yeah, and it was so lazy and it was so flopped, and it just overall put a massive dent on my thoughts of GT Sport and the way that the game has been. Like when the game first came out, you know, we had 13 car updates, we had great sort of teasers and trailers through the silhouettes. Everyone thought, hang on, this is a little bit different. We're not used to this. Let's have a guessing game. And even to this day, we do still have silhouettes where people guess what we get. And there always was a good mixture of cars as well. And now we've just got, you know, 5 generic Japanese sports cars, which I'm sure it pleases people, but at the same time, it annoys people as well. And it's the lack of consistency, really.
One of the things that I liked about the older packs, I mean, we often go back to the joke of the Honda Fit, but at least those packs...
That was the best update. What are you talking about?
They have variation. You know, you got some random Zonda R in there with a Honda Fit, and I know they weren't in the same pack, but that kind of thing where... And it's a similar method to what Forza does, and I think it's a good system, because you won't necessarily put out a pack which will ever please everyone, but at least if you keep it varied within the pack, you can cover a lot of bases, which they don't seem to be doing much anymore. With the JDM pack, for instance, I get it. It was very much so a fan-pleasing pack with the GTO, with the Impreza not so much, but still JDM.
The S2000.
For sure, the S13, definitely. The Silvia was like the number 1 most requested car because the AE86 was added, and of course the controversial Corolla being added as well. But
I mean, in terms of this update that we've recently had, as much as I dislike it, I do think it is the most well grouped, because you've only got 5 cars and they're all of the same category and they all serve the same purpose. Whereas obviously if you had before, you just have like a random F1 car with a random Le Mans car with a couple of random road cars, and there's no real consistency in how they were put together. But with this one, a nice cheap update with 5 Japanese sports cars. They're all relevant, and there are some fan favorites thrown in there. Because if you remember as well, when the S2000 GT1 Amuse, whatever it's called, when that was added in, I think you also made a point of, well, what's the point in having a track toy S2000 when you don't even have the road version, and why not put them two together? So we did finally get the road S2000 version, but that was how many months later? Was it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It seems like a very haphazard way of adding cars to the game, and even way beyond the cars that they add. One of the constant issues that I've had, and this is something which I think a lot of people completely missed the point of when I talked about it in that very highly disliked initial thoughts video on the trailer called No Spa, like what the hell's going on, where it had like 100 dislikes, but people missed the point, I think, of why I was annoyed with that. I wasn't annoyed with any of the cars in particular. Even the Corolla would have made sense if the Sprinter wasn't already in the game. But it was just the fact that they consistently, and unfortunately this is becoming their legacy at this point, they keep showing us things which we can't have. And although we eventually get them, like we eventually get the X2019, we eventually get Rain, we eventually get this and that the 1% kids constantly have first. And there are people who say stuff to try and not necessarily just be a fanboy, but they say stuff to try and give Polyphony the benefit of the doubt, which is fair enough. I would certainly appreciate the benefit of the doubt if I were in their position. But they say stuff like, oh, maybe Spa wasn't fully ready, maybe the Rain was only ready on one track, and stuff like that. It's a fair point, except Polyphony already confirmed that Spa's been ready for months, and they confirmed that months ago, and that they were just waiting for the licensing agreement to go through, which it clearly has, because they couldn't have used it even in Nations Cup if it hadn't. So it's that constant thing of showing us like, oh, you like this? Well, you can't have it. You like this? Well, you can't have it. And giving it to just the 1% just inherently creates a barrier that you do not need to have between them and us. And that's what it feels like. It feels like they're the favorited kids. They get all the stuff first, and the rest of us just get the table scraps when they can feel like being bothered enough to add it later on. And although no, Polyphony never confirmed or promised Spa or even to get Rain on every track, it was just, there's a difference between promising something and not delivering something that was never promised, of course, but there's also a very clear line between insinuating that something's going to come, which they clearly did by showing it like they know people are excited. They already know that people are going to think, oh, it's coming soon. No, it isn't, but nobody knows that. And they're just creating problems for themselves. And that's the thing that I've constantly gone back to, where it's surprisingly naive for such a big established company. And for somebody who maybe wasn't familiar with Gran Turismo, you could easily be fooled into thinking that this was their first game, because they're making all the wrong mistakes as far as marketing goes.
Like, one of the biggest gripe that I have with this game is that it was advertised as a full game, it was sold at full game price, and you even had, different versions that you pay more for just to get some sort of, exclusive content. Like you had the hardback version, whatever it's called, the steelbook cover thing, as well, the collector's edition, I think it was anyway. But you pay, and I think there was also some packages worth over £100 as well.
That's the one I paid, yeah.
Yeah, so you paid over £100 for a game that's not even complete and requires an update every month. Realistically, at the point of launch, Gran Turismo was easily a £20, £30 game at most. 3 updates every month, and of course the way that it's teased to us, that's great. I do enjoy the excitement and the build-up towards the update that comes in the next day or two. What I really did not like is when it started being leaked through social media with pictures of, hi, I'm at the FIA event. Here's a car on a screen that I just took a picture of. It's coming. Get excited.
Yeah.
But for me, I think Spa's a little bit of a exception, because obviously we've all wanted it for a while. Well, I'll say we. I can't say we want, because I hate saying that. Lots of people wanted Spa, and we finally got the teaser for it. Shown off at the FIA events, and then it didn't come in the update. I've just realised that they might have waited until, obviously, the Spa weekend for Formula One and made it sort of coincide with that event. It does make sense, but it's still a very, very poor way to just get us excited for it.
Yeah, it's just a weird way of doing things. It's like they totally forget that the community even exists and that we're going to have opinions on it. And they must, at least to some degree, know that there is a lot more controversy, really, about every update that we've had pretty much since the first ones than there have been with any previous game. Because in GT6, we didn't have hardly any updates, and yet people didn't complain about that. And the reason why they didn't complain, even though they were free, is because the game was good anyway. It was already big enough that the updates were just a nice little addition to it. Whereas when the game, like you said, is already so much smaller and so much pared back with no career mode at all to begin with, you can't afford to have these tiny little updates which add just a spit handful of a couple of cars, and also to put again into the joke of the Honda Fit, to put so much effort into these cars, which sometimes people genuinely could not care less about. For the most part, again, like you said with Spa, for instance, nothing is unanimous, but the majority of people, let's say, if we had the choice of, would you like, for instance, them to bring back, I don't know,
Midfield Raceway.
Yeah, instead, or for the car side of things, would you prefer to have a Corolla 11 alongside the Sprinter, or bring back an S13 Sylvia with an S15 Sylvia? I think more people, even JDM fans, would have gone for that because it's something new.
You do realise that in saying that, you have just made a lot of people just go, oh, why can't I do that?
Well, exactly, because I have no problem with adding cars that are like multiple versions of the same lineage, because they've done that with Porsche already. We've got 3 different 911s, and you could say, well, how could you be fine with that? But it's such a different scenario. It's a totally different thing because they're so different to each other. It's not like the Clios where it's just literally the lights are different and that's it. It seems like such a waste of effort when you could be bringing back something that people have actually asked for. Like initially even, and this is what annoys me even more, initially they were doing a great job. My favorite pack has always been the Le Mans update when we had Group C cars come back. That was such a community pleasing pack. And yet it was a pack that added a variety of things, not just Group C, if I recall correctly. And even the original packs, they were significantly larger than they are now. They had like 10 cars, 12 cars, 9 cars, and from the one point of view, they are still putting out some stuff, at least every month, but I don't really see any reason beyond them making Gran Turismo in general why those packs have gotten so much smaller over time, to the point where they're not even keeping to their own time frame. Sometimes there are no cars in a pack, sometimes it's just a track, sometimes there's no tracks and it's just a couple of cars, and there are some months where it's kind of bled over and we've ended up getting pretty much nothing in a particular month.
The worst part is they can't even claim, quality or anything like that anymore, because think back to when the 930 911 got added in. What was the first thing lots of people noticed? The headlights. They were very octagonal, or whatever the shape it was. They weren't even perfectly circular. Then you've got, in the most recent update, the Honda S2000 with the very polygon sort of shaped exhaust. It's a very up-close detail that you need to notice, but at the same time, it's still a little bit of rough around the edges when it's meant to be a quality update. And again, the thing is, when the updates started coming, it was just once a month with a maintenance period in the middle. So it was update, 2 weeks later, maintenance, 2 weeks later, update. What they're doing now is they're doing small update, 2 weeks later, small update, 2 weeks later, small update. It makes it seem a little bit more updated, I think is the best way to do it. But at the same time, it just shows that they're sacrificing something. Like, there is seriously and quite obviously something within Polyphony Digital where they're just choosing to put in less work on their current game, which, let's just remind ourselves, is coming up to 2 years old now. And it's nowhere near the end of its lifespan. So they really shouldn't really be slowing down. If they're developing Gran Turismo 7 on the sidelines, that's fair enough. But the problem, which I mostly have with Polyphony Digital, is that they just don't talk to their community. The only thing they do is they put forward the silhouettes through CAS, and then they work and do their thing, and they just go, here you go. And then that's the end of it for another month. They don't tell everyone, yeah, we're working on this, we're working on that. And as you've clearly found out, you have to go through different social media and go to different parties, such as the Time Attack Civic. You personally got the information from the actual owner of the car, whereas Polyphony Digital can't confirm it until, I don't know, it's probably in the silhouette or something like that.
Yeah,
and that's my main problem with all of this.
Yeah, and even as far as the updates go, I think what you said about the lack of dialogue, I guess, with the community, even if we had no updates at all, it would just be nice to at least be in the loop of what's going on from a business point of view, whereas they should know, especially by this point, that the less information you give to people, the more speculation's gonna happen. And the nature of people is that speculation is very rarely positive. So the kind of talk that it generates and the kind of chatter that it generates about the game just isn't beneficial for the brand. There are more people, as I've said before, who send messages about only coming back to the game just for the update and don't really care the rest of the month, people who don't even play the game anymore, people who are talking about Wreckfest and Project Cars and AC instead of Gran Turismo being their main thing. Whereas a couple of years ago, that was unheard of. People never said, well, I'm kind of getting bored of Gran Turismo 5. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that at the time, or even Gran Turismo 6, where people said, it's not quite the Gran Turismo game I wanted. Even me, I complained about the lack of career size, where you could complete it in like 2 or 3 days. But even then, there was more than enough to do in the game as a whole to keep it going for 2-3 years without even breaking a sweat, let alone in GT Sport, or on the other hand, I should say in GT Sport, that's just not the case. It's a smaller game to start with. They've added less and less content over time, and yet somehow the community is expected to maintain the same level of hype for it. And that's just not how games work. People will maintain the hype if you give them a reason to. And the complete lack of dialogue of any kind, barely any trailers. I mean, the fact that the trailer, I mean, again, this is a very simple thing, which I'm no marketing expert, but even I know you don't release a trailer for something the day before it's going to be added, because the whole point of a trailer is to build hype, not to just announce something. So releasing the trailers as they do, like the night before or even like 3 in the morning UK time, that builds no hype whatsoever. It just announces that the pack is coming, which, surprise, surprise, we all knew that anyway. So you're not building any new hype anyway, you're not bringing in new people. And at the end of the day, regardless of fandom, regardless of how long people have been playing the games, how long you've been a fan of the franchise, it is a business and they need new people to be coming in, because you cannot rely on an existing audience to just keep coming back, because people die, people play different games, people just get bored of things when they're the same. So they need to be building new people. And for the 1 or 2 people, comparatively, it's not literally 1 or 2, but the small amount of people who are coming in because they think, oh, this online stuff sounds cool, that's nothing compared to how many people were coming in when Gran Turismo had the name for being the biggest and baddest racing game out there with the best graphics and tons of cars and tons of tracks. They just don't have that anymore.
The real driving simulator.
Exactly, yeah.
I remember as well, before we even started talking about all of this, one of your main gripes was that because of, obviously, the Gran Turismo 5 and 6 servers, they shut down. Gran Turismo Sport is the only Gran Turismo game where you can collectively play with friends that isn't on a split screen. It's the only online game that you can play, and it's the only sort of direct audience racing game that you can play very well with friends. Like, you've got specific games such as F1 2019 and all those other games. You can have great fun on that, but Gran Turismo Sport is the only just pick up and play game where you can have different categories of cars and you could have different styles of the car world, such as like cruise meetup or drag racing or just even circuit racing, as the game's mostly intended for, but that's for another day. It's all put together in a way that you can have endless fun with endless possibilities on the game. And now to only have it on a game where it's started going quite heavily downhill, it's not working out very well, because the only real purpose for online and multiplayer at the moment for GT Sport is the FIA events, because that's the only ones that get coverage, and it's not fair on the average player.
No, it isn't. It's like Kaz has found this new toy that he loves and he's just going all in on it and completely forgetting that everything else exists around that. And, that's good for him. He's an artist for sure, but artists don't necessarily run businesses that well. So he needs somebody to be reminding him the rest of the community still exists, and not everyone wants this to be the next Project Cars, because if we did, we would just buy Project Cars. Instead, we bought Gran Turismo for a reason. Those of us who are new to it, or those of us who are longtime fans, we knew what we were going to get with every previous Gran Turismo. We were going to probably get, chances are, 99%, whatever, we were going to get the last game plus new content. And we were never disappointed with that. The hype for Gran Turismo 4 was massive. The hype for 5 was even bigger. The hype for 6 was massive. The hype for Sport was massive as well, because regardless of what they said about, this is a more sport-oriented game, you think, well, sure, that's marketing. We know what we're getting with Gran Turismo, and then we play it and we think, they actually weren't lying. This isn't a normal Gran Turismo game. And like you said, as I mentioned, it's the fact that we don't have a choice. And although, of course, technically you have a choice, you can just not play it. For those of us who want a Gran Turismo experience, those who are fans of it, we want to play a Gran Turismo game that, at least to some degree, gives us that feeling of nostalgia combined with something new and really enjoying that. Whereas we don't have the option. When Gran Turismo brought out the PSP game, it wasn't instead of a normal game, it was as well as that. And somehow, the crew of Gran Turismo, or the crew of Polyphony, I should say, which isn't that much bigger in size now than it was then, as far as I know, somehow they managed to do those both simultaneously, pretty much. And they still managed to get it done. And even the PSP game on that tiny little disc with an even tinier memory card is still far more expansive of a game experience than GT Sport is after 40 updates, which is ridiculous to think about. And it's just the fact that we're not given that option. The prologues were demos. The PSP game was as well. Tourist Trophy even was shown as well, not instead. For instance, the way I would liken it to is what they've done with GT Sport to a lesser degree would be kind of like if after Gran Turismo 4, Polyphony suddenly said, well, Kaz has this vision, something that he wants to do. He loves motorbikes now. He loves this project called Tourist Trophy. And if you want to continue being a fan, you're going to have to play that game because there is going to be no Gran Turismo 5. That would be ridiculous. People would be up in arms about it, and yet it's not that dissimilar with what they've done with GT Sport. It's a totally different experience, but unlike Tourist Trophy, or even unlike what Forza did with Horizon, where it was as well, not instead of the main games, they chose to not do that, and I think that was a very bad business decision to make, regardless of how good sport happens to be. If you go into a shop and you want to buy a certain type of food, somebody might offer you caviar instead. Of course, it's worth more, it's more high class, it's more luxurious, but you're not there to buy that. So
it's not what you asked for.
Exactly, yeah. And you go to a particular fandom because you know what you're going to get and because you like that. So to suddenly change it up on everyone, like I said weeks ago in, I believe, Beards and Cars, another episode, I said it would be kind of like if I suddenly announced, well, from now on, I'm only doing Forza content on the channel, no GT Sport stuff at all. Well, that's not bad for the Forza audience, but for those who join for Gran Turismo, that's kind of a big deal because they don't have the option anymore. Whereas doing, as I do, Gran Turismo and Forza, they can just not watch Forza stuff if they don't want to. Whereas with GT Sport, we're not given the option. It's that or nothing, especially when, as you said, the GT6 servers were shut down real fast compared to previous games.
But that's just because it was on a previous console, though. And the reason why I haven't actually looked into it, but I just personally believe they were shut down just simply because people stopped playing the PS3 because PS4 is starting to age, and they're just moving on to this slowly. There's the problem again. Just going back to the way that it was all sold and how the game was all prepared. You remember the demo? We had very, very, very classic Gran Turismo vibes through the. They were little training sessions, but they looked and pretty much were the old licenses. Like you had the slower performance cars accelerating to 100 meters and then braking. Then you had faster cars with longer distances, and you had to get bronze, silver, or gold to progress. That was probably my favorite thing from the start of GT Sport. They sold it like it was sort of like a rebirthed Gran Turismo 3 or 4. Granted that some of us, and a lot of us, knew that it wasn't going to quite be a traditional Gran Turismo, but it was still Gran Turismo. And that showed it very well.
Yeah, it's a situation which I don't necessarily have I don't know, strict advice even on how I think they could do better. But it's just even simple stuff like that communication that we talked about. It costs them nothing to talk to the community, and they still don't do it. And it's a weird choice to make. Like deliberately alienating the people who want to love everything you're doing. It's a very strange way of running a business, and I don't understand why they're doing it. It really feels like hubris to some degree of like an artist who's so purely focused on painting this particular thing that he has in mind that his family crumbles around him because he's not paying any attention to them. And although that's an extreme example, it feels like Kaz is doing the same thing. He's so obsessed with this new toy that is the Nations Cup stuff and people taking it seriously as this FIA integrated thing. And he himself is obviously very clearly interested in racing. He's raced himself at the Nürburgring and for various teams and cars. But he has to appreciate, even if he doesn't agree with it, he has to acknowledge as a businessman, not just an artist, that not everyone wants that. And so if he wants to go all in on the online stuff, good for him. But at the same time, acknowledge you are going to lose a lot of fans over that decision. And as long as you can afford to take that loss, not just from a money point of view, but from the credibility, you could even say, of Polyphony as a business and Gran Turismo as a franchise, if you can put up with that loss and that hit, then sure, go for it. But a lot of us won't necessarily be around for much longer if, for instance, instead of Gran Turismo 7, it ends up being GT Sport 2, because that will immediately put a lot of people into a sour position based on what this game felt like. Even after all of the updates, if you start playing it now and get all the cars and all the tracks, it's still smaller than Gran Turismo 3 was. So to have it as this so-called, pinnacle of what the series is and has to offer, yes, in some ways it is. The physics are more realistic, the graphics are better, the online stuff, of course, is better. But
you actually get a decal editor.
Exactly.
Something we've wanted for a long time as well.
There are tons of things that they've done well, individual little things, but I think it's the overall vibe of the game which just feels like a prologue, like a really big prologue, as I think you mentioned earlier on, aspects of that as well. And I think, and I hope that some aspects are carried over to the next game, because I think some of them are great, but other ones, they just don't really fit in, I think, with the existing fandom. Like I said, if you want to create a new fandom, that's all well and good, but you have to acknowledge you're going to lose some of those people at least. And I've mentioned before even that if I wasn't putting out as much content as I was, I definitely would be one of those people who only comes back each month just to check out the new cars and then would probably just play something else immediately anyway.
I think it would be worth saying right now that if they did advertise and talk to the community as much as they do with the FIA events, because they put in so much effort for the way that they talk about the FIA events, the way they prepare them, the way they do little segments of each driver and all that sort of, lovely hand-in-hand stuff. If they put in that much effort into talking about just the game in general, the updates to come, and what the community must look forward to for the next update, if they did that, I can guarantee we would not be having this conversation right now. And it's really sad to think about that way.
Yeah, like I said, it's strange. I don't really understand what their thinking is, because I think if I could understand it, I probably wouldn't criticize it, because it would make sense to me, but it doesn't.
The worst thing is, on the flip side, is that because of the FIA events, they're getting more in terms, they're getting more for themselves at the same time, which hopefully they then feed back into the community and into the game. Like in the most recent FIA event, they had a partnership with Michelin, and they also brought in Juan Pablo Montoya, a previous F1 driver, IndyCar driver, you name it. Very high-profile guy in the motorsporting world. And because of the way that they actually talk about the FIA events, they were able to bring in these big names. And I can also imagine as well, it brings in money. So,
yeah.
If it's, if it just gets fed back into the community, then I would happily forgive the way that Polyphony have been advertising the FIA events if what they've been doing gets put back in for the community. That's all I'm going to say on that matter for now.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with that. It's strangely inconsistent, because in that way they definitely do put in the effort, and then for other aspects they don't, which is very strange, almost like the different parts of Polyphony aren't necessarily talking to each other, because even in, well, what I said earlier about it doesn't cost anything to talk to your community, even if, for instance, at those Nations Cup events, you see the interviews afterward, you see Jimmy Broadbent getting very involved into that side of things, which is cool for him, etc. But if they've got someone of his profile, or even other channels, and of course I'm not necessarily putting myself forward, but some higher profile channel like Super GT, who was involved with them recently behind the driver's seat, with Jimmy, with various other channels who are much larger and who would love to work with them in that kind of commentator style position, they clearly have a place for those people. They have, I don't know, the budget, whatever you'd want to call it, to have those people there. But why not then? You are literally tapping into one of the most influential forms of advertising and marketing and street level word of mouth, which is a YouTuber, because people actually feel a connection to YouTubers in a way that they never will to a faceless business. Even if Kaz is at the helm, it's still just a business. If you've got that at your fingertips and make no use of it, they could even have, Jimmy Broadbent or whoever being involved in the Gran Turismo channel. They could use him like Kaz does with the silhouettes being released from his page rather than the Gran Turismo page, as is already done. So they're clearly not a stickler for that. Why not have, for instance, Jimmy, as an example, talking to the community about things that Polyphony have discussed with him, stuff that is, suitable for public forum, obviously, like what we have planned for the future. Don't set anything in stone. Just say, we're thinking about this. We've got this in mind at some point. And even using my own channel as an example, over the years even, I've said, I have this in mind for the channel. I have that in mind. I have these goals, things which I can't currently talk about. I never get any backlash over those things, even though I'm very vague, because as long as people know that something is coming, they will be patient. If you have no information to work with at all, which is what Polyphony is doing, then people will make up their own narrative. And more often than not, it ends up being a negative one. And I think that's a shame, because if they did use someone like Jimmy, whatever, he would be able to have that street level word of mouth on behalf of the channel, being like the man of the people kind of thing. And to just not make use of that is a very, again, strange choice to me.
To be honest with this bit, I don't fully understand, so I'm going to just chill on this little segment. But the thing I do understand though is obviously getting the high profile people in, getting the good word around. That is all well and good, but at the same time, it's a very limited number of people. Like if we just list two people off the top of our heads, Jimmy Broadbent, he's obviously FIA Gran Turismo commentator for the British side of things, and then there's of course Super GT, who was brought in to race alongside Hizal in the Duo Cup, whatever it was called, the one that Montoya featured in as well. That brought in a lot of high-profile views, but it wasn't that different to the previous ones. So would the high-profile names actually make that much of a difference? I would say yes, because obviously it would be used in a different way, and they would talk about certain things, like you previously mentioned. But would it be a big enough thing for Polyphony to think, hang on, this can work out in our favour? Let's go ahead with it.
Yeah, that's the question. And coming from it as obviously we approach that same question from different points of view. You as a very supportive and long-term helper of this community, me as the creator side of the community, but both have valid different points of view. For instance, I have no idea what it's like to be a fan of my channel because I'm not in that position. And the other way around, like you said, you can't so much speak to the creator side of things. But with what I was saying, just so that there's no confusion in the comments, especially, I'm not saying more of what they did in that example, with Montoya and that kind of stuff. I don't mean the racing side of things. I'm talking just, for instance, even a low-level partnership, not necessarily like on a payroll, every video has to be spreading the good word kind of thing, but even if, for instance, each month, as well as Kaz putting out his little teasers and stuff, why not have that, for instance, trailer also debut on Jimmy's channel? Or have him put out tweets regarding new stuff that's coming? It's a very cheap, incredibly cost-effective way of spreading at least some chatter, but more often than not positive chatter regarding anything that's coming to the game. And at this point, I think that, as the saying goes, any news, any press is good press. And because we have nothing to work with, why would people even want to talk about Gran Turismo unless they're already a super fan like we are? They need to increase that chatter.
Well, either way, at the end of the day, it's still a Gran Turismo game, and we're still going to love it for what it is. But, you know, like we've been saying for the last however long we've been doing this recording, the way the advertisement is, the way that the communication between the regular fans versus the FIA fans and the FIA competitors, it is, and I really don't want to say it this way, but it's come to the point where I can only describe it as a joke. And once again, we are finding ourselves, even with the video that you just put out earlier today, we're finding leaks to get our information. Like, fair enough, we're potentially getting the Ferrari Daytona, and I am so looking forward to it. It's one of my favorite classic Ferraris, and it was one of my favorite cars in Gran Turismo 6. Fair enough, I'm looking forward to it, but at the same time, you know, it's not their word. It's someone else doing it for them, and it just can't continue like this.
Yeah, when leaks are the best form of news, they're doing something wrong. Yeah, yeah. And just
I think we've covered everything now.
Pretty much. And just to speak to something that you did reference purely on the admin side of things, this video is probably going to go up on Saturday. So when Mav said about the leaks, that wasn't this morning, that was a few days ago when the Ferrari 365 was seen in an image. Who knows what could have happened since then, but because that's the day that we're recording this on. But yeah, I loved having you on for this collab episode. Doubtless it will be another very controversial one. Plenty of dislikes, plenty of hate comments, all that kind of usual good stuff. But it does show, regardless of if you agree or disagree, that it is a conversation that needs to be had down in the comments between us on the Discord server. If you're not already on the Discord server, you should be. There's a link down below. You can join it. Of course, it's free. Well over 500 of us on there now, and Mav is the acting head of that as well. And
I'm recruiting moderators.
yeah, he is at the same time as well. And so I'd like to thank Mav for joining me for this one. It's been a long time coming, constantly trying to arrange it, especially on the more technical side of things. And I do plan to have other creators as well. We've got HSG Ness. I believe Nismo Nath is also going to be on here, maybe some others too. Not necessarily just Patreon supporters, but probably those will be the main ones to begin with, at least. And we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But as I said, thanks to Mav for being here. And if you want to check out previous episodes or grab this SoundCloud version, the audio-only version of the podcast, click on that link down below as well. And until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always,
thanks for watching.